And let me continue introducing the next speaker, which is Joanna Zylinska, who is an artist, writer, curator, and a professor of media philosophy and critical digital, I like that, practice at King's College London. She's the author of a number of books, including AI Art, Machine Visions, and A Warped Dream, in 2020. Her art practice involves experimenting with different kinds of image-based media. Please, Joanna, enlighten us. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll do my best with the enlightening bit. Thank you so much for the invitation. Really happy to be here with you all. Let me do the slide bit now. Yeah. Is that okay? Can you all see the screen? Give me a sign. You're all muted.
Yes, yes, yes.
Thank you. Okay. So, the current discourse on AI remains largely instrumental, trapped between the hurrah optimism of big tech and its critical assessment by scholars and activists. Political debate today also finds itself increasingly polarized. Given this state of events, could we mobilize non-human creativity as a way of opening our all-too-human ways of thinking and acting? Can AI play the role of a philosopher visionary that will show us a way out? Could it get beyond the limitations of our human frames of mind to imagine a different set of propositions for us? Could it actually envisage a better future for humans and non-humans alike while showing us to get there? Now, history, science fiction, and the current model of extractive capitalism, which repurposes all openings as resources for its own growth, all indicate that this idea is unlikely to succeed. But given how stuck we currently are, politically, economically, and climatologically, it seems worth dreaming up some literally unthinkable visions for our planetary survival and coexistence. Film theorist Janet Harbert suggests that the hope of future salvation rests on the human capacity to mentally imagine, to be affected by the image. As a first step, AI-driven art may therefore become a realm of picturing a better future beyond our wildest human dreams. But AI and machine learning algorithms put to work in university labs, research and policy centers, and art organizations could also perhaps envisage ways of co-engineering this better future beyond the rigidity of the present modernist paradigm that we seem unable to shake off. So now I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do today. So drawing on my philosophical work and my art practice, my talk will explore how we can mobilize non-human creativity as a way of opening up our all-too-human ways of thinking and acting. But what is non-human creativity? Well, one way of answering this question is by suggesting that human creativity has always been partly non-human. That is to say that it has always entailed an other than human element. At the same time, this kind of creative activity still needs to be recognized and valorized as art by individual humans, as well as human institutions and practices. So my attempt to explore the problem of non-human creativity and artificial imagination in this talk will be divided into two parts. In part one, I will draw on selected works of AI-based art that engage implicitly or explicitly with this proposition about human creativity being partly non-human. In part two, I will introduce a recent film of mine, produced in collaboration with various AI models to illustrate my attempt to perform and not just think about this idea of non-human creativity, while also trying to imagine a better future. Okay, so on to part one, machinic co-creation. In this picture, we can see a four-wheeled vehicle driving alongside a white wall. During its up and down journeys, it is leaving multicolored squiggles on the wall that look like graffiti. This is Senseless Drawing Bot by Sokano and Takahiro Yamaguchi, which is another example of art-making robots which have graced the art scene since computation allowed for the removal of the human artist from the visible side of the creative process, even if not from its planning, design, and programming. In a similar vein, Lionel Mura's robot art uses ensembles of small programmable vehicles that leave colorful ink marks on large sheets of paper in response to cues. Following in the footsteps of their renowned predecessors, such as Jean Tinguely and his kinetic painting sculptures called Mathematics, and Carol Cohen with his painting program Aaron, these new iterations of art-making robots go beyond the relatively narrow scope of creative possibilities resulting from the historical limitations of the mechanical systems underpinning them. They also go further than their more mainstream counterparts, whose modus operandi is premised on style transfer, where a robot can produce a credible rendition of, say, Van Gogh's The Starry Night in under 5 hours. So using the principles of machine learning, the art-making robots of Kano, Yamaguchi, and Mura pick up cues from the environment to come up with novel images that their programmers have no ultimate control over. This is the sense in which I'm using the term novel here. Drawing on complex algorithms of artificial intelligence, which make it impossible to predict the final outcome of the drawing or painting process, those works reboot robot art as a playful, almost childlike pastime, and a spontaneous expression of a moving body. Except here, the body is no longer human. With this, the robot's constructors stage the provocative idea of creativity as a domain of more than human activity. We could ask whether these artworks genuinely withdraw the human artist from the scene, or do they perhaps enact a different, but not any less radical proposition? The possibility of the absence of agency at the heart of the human, of the fact that there is no there, not just in artists, but in all of us. My own position on what I term non-human creativity is aligned with a theoretical standpoint of critical posthumanism, a position which negotiates the pressing question of what it means to be human under the conditions of globalization, technoscience, late capitalism, and climate change. This position doesn't mean any straightforward overcoming of the human, were such a thing even possible, but rather a rewriting or reenactment of the human under the crisis conditions mentioned earlier. The said crisis is multiple in volume and planetary in scale. Importantly, critical posthumanism doesn't just describe it, it also mobilizes the humans and the planet's fragility as an ethico-political demand. Artists today are responding to this demand in a variety of affective registers, from horror, melancholia, and mourning, through to irony, parody, and exuberant play. This reenactment of human subjectivity and agency is often accompanied by an attempt to rethink the role and position of the artist, acknowledging entanglement and co-creation as the ontological condition of existence for us all. So as a working definition, I'm going to adopt computer scientist Margaret Bowden's theorization of creativity as the ability to come up with ideas and artifacts that are new, surprising, and valuable. Bowden's writings on creativity deserve attention because of her efforts to take computer art and other forms of media art seriously as interventions that can shift established epistemological and ontological frames. In Creativity and Art, 3 Roads to Surprise, she recognizes that some philosophers refuse to admit the possibility of computer by art by defining art in exclusively human terms. Anthony O'Hare, for example, insists that art involves some form of communication between one human being and another, with artist and audience being required to share human experience. In contradistinction to such narrowly humanist views, Bowden acknowledges the possibility of defining art in terms of properties of the art object that are not exclusively human, even if she herself doesn't follow through on the investigation of what such non-human art would present as, mean, and of who it would be addressed to or meaningful to. Nor does she pay enough attention to the cultural context in which creativity emerges as both a trait and a concept. The humanist concept of creativity that Bowden works against has been with us at least since the Renaissance. Modeled on the ex nihilo way in which God was supposed to have created the universe, it has found a translation in the romantic idea of the human, most often of the male variety, as a standalone genius, thinking amazing thoughts and making beautiful artifacts from above the world. Explicit challenges to the humanist model of creativity have recently been issued from many other directions than just computer science or computer-based art. In evolutionary psychology, the emergence of creativity's outcomes in the form of art is seen as being continuous with the creative processes of other living beings, such as bowerbirds, whose males construct colorful multi-texture lodgings. You can see them in the image here. And marine creatures such as snails, bivalves, and coral polyps, which produce elaborate limescale architectures to serve as their homes. Creativity is explained by many scientists as offering a species-level advantage through enhancing our cognitive faculties or satisfying our supposedly innate desire for symmetry, order, and beauty. Now, philosopher of post-human thought Claire Colebrook doesn't mince her words in critiquing this line of thinking. Such an argument is stupid, she writes, not because it's wrong, error, but because it fails to give form to the drives that have generated art. There may be a drive for pattern finding that helps animals to survive, but art is the power to render that drive different from its originating ground, thwarting and perverting patterns, generating more complex syntheses. Following this argument, it's not enough for something to look like what we have predefined as art to us humans. Hence, all these experiments in getting chimpanzees or elephants to paint and then delighting in the abstractions should just be considered as silly humanist distractions that end up reaffirming the human as the sole arbiter of artistic judgment and sole owner of art as both activity and concept. Colebrook's argument builds on Henri Bergson's idea of creative evolution, where life is seen as an explosive power of creative difference and a counter tendency of resistance. Bergson also emphasizes our tendency to cut up matter and carve out objects from the flow of life, a tendency that is a sense-making strategy enacted by humans. We could therefore say that, under certain circumstances, certain groups of living beings recognize these certain acts unfolding across time as art, and have, through their history, created a whole lot of institutions and practices that legitimate those practices in these terms. Colebrook's critical statement shouldn't therefore be mistaken for a postulation of uniquely human creativity. What she's rather getting at is that the evolutionary functionalist explanation of art curtails all too quickly the human ability to recognize something as truly creative. This logic can be seen in the pronouncements of technology companies, which promise us creative gadgets that will be absolute game changers, while having to rely on the majority of the elements of the game, the capitalist system of exchange, the extractivist logic of overproduction and overconsumption, to remain largely the same, or even be strengthened in the process. Such arguments by extension with regard to creativity are therefore deeply uncreative. They show a failure of imagination, or worse, a willing desire for things not to get too different and hence too creative. So this brings us to a concept of creativity as non-functional excess, a breaking through beyond the human, and a possibility of the emergence of new sensations and new modes of knowing. And this is indeed a take on the non-human creativity I want to offer in my work. So on to the second part now, imaging and imagining a better future with AI or not. Let me now offer you an example from my own art practice, which involves a remaking with the help of some machine learning algorithms and models of the 1962 photo film La Jetée by French director Chris Marker. Marker's film serves as an ideal case study for probing the question of non-human creativity because of the knowing embrace of the idea of automatic creation by its maker. The director confessed that the film had been made like a piece of automatic writing. It was in the editing that the pieces of the puzzle came together, and it wasn't me who designed the puzzle, said Marker. La Jetée opens with a slow pan over a photograph of an open-air viewing platform, a jetty, at the Orly airport in Paris. A short sequence of closely cut images later, we are told by a deadpan narrator that something violent has just occurred. The sequence of images is accompanied by a mysterious-sounding line. This is the story of a man marked by an image from his childhood. We then encounter the said man several years later in Paris, which in the meantime has been destroyed by World War III. Radioactive contamination has pushed all the survivors underground. The man is imprisoned in a medical facility run by an army of German-speaking experimenters with an ominous-looking director at its head. He's being primed for time travel. He will need to go into the future to save humanity by finding a hole in time through which to send food energy supplies. Having accomplished his mission, he is no longer needed. He will have to be eliminated. We then realized together with him that the opening scene was the moment of his death. So Marker's film, capturing the sense of the material and moral distraction brought on by World War II and a premonition of a nuclear holocaust, is both a memory exercise and a lesson in how to remember well. La Jetée's post-apocalyptic tenor and its haunting narrative make it an apt reference point for the current moment of the multiple crises in which our world finds itself in 2022. The COVID-19 pandemic, with its multiple waves and unequal distribution of mortality and health, is reminiscent of the time loops enacted in La Jetée, whereby the past cuts across the present to leap into the future and then back again. The renewed threat of World War III we're experiencing now generates a similar sense of anxiety. The premonition of an imminent end to our liberal fantasy of our ways of life, coupled with a desire for things to return to how they once were very quickly, fuel the imagination of not only climate change deniers, anti-vaxxers and racists, but also of many others who carry a strong mental image of a better yesteryear, even if that image is just a dream. So in response to all of this, my experiment consisted in making a 9-minute film, A Gift of the World, Oedipus on the Jetty. I'll explain the weird title in a minute, by way of an AI remediation of La Jetée through the socio-political concerns of the present moment in the face of an apocalyptic crisis. The first step of my project involved training a GAN model called StyleGAN2 on a database of still images which I extracted from Marker's film. GANs, as many of you will know, are machine learning programs that use two neural networks. That is an algorithm designed in an open-ended manner from the bottom up in a way that is meant to imitate or rather schematize the way the human brain works. The two networks in a GAN are positioned as adversaries, with one program to generate convincing and correct input, the other to control and improve upon this input according to the truth-falsehood criteria. The ongoing interaction makes both networks improve with time, learning from each other while trying to outperform each other in obtaining satisfactory results. The GAN model I used had been designed to mimic the style of the images fed into it to train it, with a view to generating an infinite number of similar-looking images. And I'm just going to show you a trailer from a film to give you a sense of what it was like. It's going to be about a minute and a bit. Should start playing. Can you hear the sound? Is the sound playing?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you.
This is the story of a man marked by an image from his childhood. He was the son of a Roman Catholic father and a Catholic mother. His mother was an itinerant widow, and he had a sister who was a British officer. He had no family and was just a man. He would have thought of the woman as a baby. He was already a soldier, a member of the Great Army.
Okay, so the script of my film was created with the assistance of GPT-2, an unsupervised AI language model that had been trained on the web text dataset containing millions of web pages. I started by feeding the model La Jetées' famous opening line, "This is the story of a man marked by an image from his childhood." The model responded by taking the story in an unexpected direction. Any edits I did to the script were minor, with some of the language errors identified as important moments in my experiment and hence retained. The editing of the video was intuitive and consisted of my own visual and corporeal responses to both the script and the GAN images. Interestingly, the images themselves, produced by an algorithm that tried to remake Marker's film by picking up its key visual features, and especially those pertaining to humans, as is often the case in such generative programs that had been trained on photos of human faces, manifested various body parts, frequently multiplied: noses, hair, eyes, kidneys, kidney-like eyes. The way generative networks operate is by repeatedly optimizing pixels in an image to achieve some desired state of activations. That desired state is compared against the source material, that is, the training set. Developers frequently resort to the metaphor of a dream to describe the working of neural nets, suggesting that such networks find patterns in images not so much in a logical pre-programmed way, but rather by using previous data and memories as prompts for making new connections between data points and for generating new data. Their operations are presented as being akin to what human minds do while being at rest, either when we are asleep or daydreaming. By anthropomorphizing their products, engineers and the technology companies they work for absolve themselves of the responsibility for their programming decisions and for those decisions' unintended consequences. Now, I was aware that the playful sense of experimentation I had adopted as my method was tinged with the more ominous undertones of the experiments conducted on Marker's main character in the underground camp. The counter-dream aspect was also important for me, given the sociopolitical limitations of AI technology, revealing not only gender and racial bias, but also the exclusionary and unjust logic underlying many of its founding principles. I was curious about what AI would do to the original source material, but I knew I would need to step in as both a dream catcher and analyst. The model tried to remain faithful to the spirit and sense of Marker's opening line by reenacting the personal and global apocalypse as an Oedipal drama. The AI engines deployed in the visual and textual models ended up producing a more multi-layered show, one that unfolded as much on the gender front as it did on the humanist existential one. We could perhaps say that the film dreamt itself as a feminist intervention into the heteronormative fetishism of the apocalypse, as dreamt up in key Western cultural texts, from the Bible through to Marker's film. What starts as a conversation between mother and son in La Jetée ends up through a series of algorithmic glitches as a sequence of slippages that enter a gender vortex in which man becomes woman, mother becomes father, he becomes she. With the dissolution of the nuclear family, the Oedipal drama as the structuring device of our cultural script disappears. The sense of premonition still lingers, but it is now accompanied by the possibility of an opening and a liberation. This possibility can be read as a feminist gift, a gift, to cite art critic Griselda Pollock, of what the feminine can be thought to be if we emerge from the exclusivity of the Oedipal logic of the phallus as the only arbiter of psychic life and signification. How is that for imagining and imaging a different future? So to find out more about my thinking on AI, you can download for free my book, AI, Machine Visions and Open Dreams, in which I actually say a lot of horrible things about using guns for art. So I'm kind of working partly against guns, partly with them as a way of philosophizing about media, but also through and with media. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. A very, very interesting movie, and I like your interpretation of the unexpected, the glitch, and the accident. Yeah. Thank you. So let's keep going on.